Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Tutoring Tuesday. This is Kristen coming to you live from my kitchen. Tonight we're going to focus on dividing fractions specifically for grade 5 students. So please just know that this is very important for grade 5 students to truly understand the meaning of what it means to divide fractions, either a whole number by a unit fraction or a unit fraction by a whole number. Excuse me. One thing to also keep in mind is the language that we use when we are dividing fractions. So we are technically, when we are sharing, right, dividing, we're fair sharing, okay? So when we're dividing, we're basically taking a quantity and we're equally sharing it among whatever it is. It could be putting it into bags, or it could be putting or distributing it among people. So with division, we really want to make sure that we're using that term fair share. We're fairly sharing things equally among whatever it is that the situation is asking us to share it among. So tonight, I'm not going to teach you any tricks. I'm not going to teach you any shortcuts, because truthfully, this standard, you really need to understand the meaning behind it. Why does it work? If you're anything like me, I went to school and they taught me to keep the first fraction, flip the sign to multiplication, and change the last fraction. I had no idea what I was doing. Zero conceptual understanding. I just did it just to get the right answer. But now that I teach it and I see kids and the light bulbs go off, they get it and they're showing it and they're modeling, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this makes so much sense. So throughout this video, some of the things that I might discuss might go against what you have been taught, and that's okay. I just ask that you be open and willing just to see why it works. And I promise you, if you're anything like me, you're going to be absolutely stunned. So let's get down to basics. Like I shared with you, we are just going to be focusing on the grade 5 standard. So once students go into the later grades of grade 6, they are going to be doing slightly more challenging problems, but if they can't go into grade 6 having the firm foundation of what grade 5 covers, they're going to be lost in the sauce. So let's make sure that doesn't happen, shall we? All right, so I'm going to flip you guys around. I am trying something new tonight. I have a dry erase board. I'm trying to save paper. I'm trying to be more green. So we'll see if this works, and if it doesn't, that's okay too. And like always, I will be posting the YouTube video, so that way if you feel as if this would be very helpful for anyone that is struggling with knowing how to divide fractions in grade 5, please by all means share away. That's why I do this. All right, let's get started. Let me flip you guys around. All right. So the first thing I want us to kind of think about when we're thinking about dividing fractions, of course that doesn't work. So if we're dividing fractions, and like I just shared, if you're just popping on, we're specifically focusing on grade 5 standards, okay? So when we're thinking about that division, we really want to focus on that term equal shares, or a fair share, okay? So you're basically fairly sharing whatever it is that the situation is asking you to do. So these are terms that you're going to hear me say, and you're going to hear me refer to throughout this entire short little mini session. All right, so if we think back to just pure division, let's just bring it back to basics. If we had 4 cookies and we're sharing them with 2 friends, how many cookies will each friend get? And basically what we're doing is we're trying to find out how many groups of 2 fit into 4. And if I was to draw that out, I would start with my whole, which is 4. I would find out that I have 2 equal groups of 2. Okay, so that's basically where we start with division. But now what happens when we take this and we switch the gear into 4 divided by 1/2. Now this is all of a sudden where people are like, oh my gosh, I don't know what to do, what's happening? This is also where, when we were first kind of teaching division, we always say that the number becomes smaller. that is something that expires. So please refrain from doing that with your kiddos at home. With division, all we are doing is we're taking a whole, we're equally sharing it among a certain number of groups. So just like we did with 4 divided by 2, we're trying to find out how many halves fit into 4. So in order to do that, so this would be like a situation where you have 4 people sharing a pound of chocolate or something like that. So we need to figure out how many halves fit into 4. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. So we really want to find out how many halves fit into 4. So I'm going to break all of these up into halves. So here's 1 half, 2 halves. 1 half, 2 halves. 1 half, 2 halves. 1 half, 2 halves. So the question is how many halves can be fairly shared among 4 people? And the answer is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 halves in 4. We can even label them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Same thing that we did with 4 divided by 2, we're doing here, okay? So now let's think about another problem, see if it works. So now, let's pick 3. Let's divide it by 4. So once again, we're fairly sharing 3, and we're trying to figure out how many fourths fit into 3 wholes. So once again, and I always when I'm dealing with fractions, I always refer to a rectangle. For me, rectangles are so much easier to deal with. Circles, you start talking about unequal shares and things like that. So rectangles for me are just way easier. So remember, we're starting with our whole, which is 3. And you're determining if I'm dividing these or fairly sharing them into fourths, how many fourths can actually fit into 3? So I'm going to fairly share each one of these into fourths. Now, how many fourths fit into 3? And we can count them up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So basically, when we're dealing with division and dealing with a whole number divided by a unit fraction, we are basically taking that whole amount, just like we would be in typical division. So I'll bring us back to home base, 9 divided by 3. We're taking that whole amount, and we're determining how many equal groups of 3 can fit into 9, right? So here's my 9. How many equal groups of 3 can fit into there? And we can clearly see that there are 3. Same thing here. We're taking 3 wholes and we're determining how many 1/4 fit into that. So if we were to divide each one of these into fourths, how many fourths would fit into my whole my whole 3 amount? Okay, let's try another one, and I'm going to put this one in context so that way you guys can understand where this would come into play. So for those of you that don't know, I love running, so I'm going to bring in running into this. I tend to always resort to food, but I'm going to actually try to be on the more healthy side, and we're going to talk about running right now. So we already talked about chocolate, so now let's run off that chocolate, right? So let's say Kristen wants to run 6 miles this month. She plans to run 1/4 mile each day. So my goal is my whole amount would be 6 miles, and I need to determine how many 1/4 miles fits into 6 to determine how many days it will take me to run the 6 miles. So once again, we're going to bring it back to 6 wholes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And we're determining how many 1/4 fit into that. So we need to break up into 1/4 increments to determine how many days it's going to take me to run my whole 6 miles. This is not a true story, everyone. So 1/4 and how many? And we can clearly see that it's 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, and 24. So it's going to take 24 days. So there are 24 1/4 that fit into 6. And you can encourage them to count. You can encourage them to do whatever they need to do. All right, so grade 5 talks about a whole number divided by a unit fraction. That's one part of the standard. The other part of the standard is actually the reverse. It's unit fraction divided by a whole number. This would be like you have like half a pint of ice cream left and you want to share it among 3 friends. How much, would each friend get? So let's kind of dive into that. Let's actually use that example. So we have half, and I'll say half a gallon because that's a little more appropriate. So half a gallon of ice cream, and you're going to share it among your 3 friends. Okay? So we're going to determine how many or how much of the ice cream will your friends get. Now remember, we're not dealing with a whole here, whereas before we were dealing with wholes, so we had to actually make separate wholes. But this, we're dealing a part of a whole to start. So I'm going to draw my part of a whole. Okay, so we're only dealing with this half of a gallon. So I'm going to actually show that to you. Okay, and we're sharing this half gallon with 3 friends evenly. We're equally sharing this half of a gallon with 3 of my friends. Now remember, with division, with anything with fractions, it always relates back to your whole. So you need to always make sure that your half, which you're currently working with, is related to your whole, okay? And this is going to come into play in a little bit. So let me share with you. So if I'm taking this half and I'm sharing it among 3 friends, the question is, how much will each friend get? So this would be 1 of your friends, 2 of your friends, and 3 of your friends. Of course, all of my blacks are running out of ink. So, what do you guys think? Thinking about back to your whole, this size of your piece is actually 1/6. So I'm taking half of my gallon of ice cream, I'm dividing it equally among 3 friends, and of my whole, I'm left with 1/6. Let's try another one. So this time we have a third, and we're sharing 1/3 of ice cream, or 1/3 pound of chocolate, among 4 friends. So the question is how much of the chocolate would each friend get? So remember, 1/3 is part of your whole, so you're going to refer to that part of your whole. I'm going to shade in 1/3 because that's what we are focusing on. And I always encourage students to make sure that they label so that way we know that we're dealing with 1/3 pound or 1/3 whatever it is, okay? Now what are we doing with that 1/3? We're determining if we were to evenly share it among 4 people or put them into 4 groups, how many or how much would each student or each child receive? So we're going to do that right now. We're going to share it, partition it into 4 equal parts. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can see that horizontally. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now, if you noticed how I purposefully made my 1/3 go vertically and then I partitioned it horizontally, this will allow your students to see exactly how much of your whole each student receives or each child receives. And if you notice that each child will receive 1/12 of the pound of chocolate if they were to divide it among 4 of their friends. So thinking back to division and thinking back to what we learned, thinking about 12 divided by 4, I don't know about you, but I always thought division meant taking a whole and splitting them into smaller groups to get to a smaller quotient. Sorry about that. And hearing that rule, that my answer always had to get smaller when I divided, really messed with me when I started thinking about, well, I'm starting with a third, and I know a third is larger than what's happening here. So remember, the rule of when I divide a number gets smaller will expire, and it's going to cause some misconceptions with students. So just talk about what division is all about. You're taking a certain amount and you're dividing it equally to determine how much is in each group. And that's it. So remember, in 5th grade, we focus on 2 things. We're really focusing on equally sharing, fair share. We work with that term partition, because when we partition, we are breaking them up into smaller groups. And of course, I spelled partition wrong. It's been a long day. We're taking a whole and we're dividing it among a unit fraction, and we also take a unit fraction and we divide it by a whole number. And remembering to always think about, when we're dividing, we are taking a certain amount and we're determining what happens when we equally share it among the next, among the amount of groups that we have to make. Okay, so if it's less than a whole, we need to make sure that we're shading that in, because that's what part of the whole we're referring to. Only half of the gallon of ice cream are we sharing with 3 friends, not the whole gallon. Okay. Now I want to break this down into kind of fun facts. Division of fractions is exactly what fractions are all about. So if I did have 1 gallon of ice cream and I shared it among 3 friends, let's try that out. 1 gallon of ice cream, shared among 3 friends. How much would each friend get? 1/3. 1 divided by 3 is 1 over 3, 1/3. So that's really the foundation of what fractions are. It's just you're dividing a smaller number by a larger quantity to arrive at your fraction. So when we take a fraction, we divide it by a whole number, we need to make sure that we always go back to relating it to that whole. All right, so let me flip you guys around and finish it up. So hopefully this was helpful for you guys in knowing and trying to understand what it means to really divide by a unit fraction or by a whole number, or a unit fraction by a whole number. And one thing to really keep in mind is that tricks only get us so far, so we really want to make sure that we understand what is actually happening. If I have 3 of something, right, and I need to figure out how many half cups fit into, like, say if you have a 3-pound bag of chocolate chips and the recipe calls for half a cup, you need to determine how many half cups fit into the 3-pound bag, or how many are in the 3-pound bag, to determine maybe how many batches of chocolate chip cookies, or whatever you guys are making. So it really relates back to what is actually happening in the problem. So hopefully this was enjoyable for you guys. Hopefully this was helpful. I'm always looking for any suggestions that you may have for next week's Tutoring Tuesday, so please put it in the comments below. I'd be happy to do whatever it is that you guys need. Remember, math is great, math is beautiful, math is fun. Never forget. Talk to you soon. Bye.